I'm honored to present this book, Give Peace a Chance, Preventing Mass Violence, by David Hamburg and Eric Hamburg, with the cover showing the hand of a child painting a dove, a very appropriate symbolism. This book draws on a great deal of research, field observation, and careful description of the paths to mass violence. It is a synthesis of the author's several decades of research and experience with preventing mass violence, including various wars and mass atrocities. This book is built on pillars that make possible long-term ways of preventing mass violence, some useful now, some later. What are the pillars of prevention? First, education for human survival. Second, proactive help, including preventive diplomacy. Third, fostering indigenous democracy. Fourth, building equitable socioeconomic development. Fifth, promoting and protecting human rights. Sixth, restraints on highly lethal weapons. Now, fundamentally, this book is distinctive in emphasizing prevention, not waiting for disaster as we historically have done, but more than emphasizing prevention, it emphasizes early prevention. One might almost say early prevention. The earlier the better. What is distinctive about the early prevention approach to mass violence? It emphasizes proactive help to countries in trouble, if possible prior to any killing. Since danger signals are typically evident years before the carnage, there is ample warning time to act before blood flows. It recommends the formulation and dissemination of specific response options and contingency plans to deal with early warning signals, what to do till the doctor comes. It draws together many tools, strategies, and practices to prevent mass violence, information, ideas, and policies from many intellectual, geographical, and technical sources. It clarifies what various international organizations can use these tools, strategies, and practices most effectively, and emphasizes the role of the established democracies. Those 5 points are the essence of early prevention. Now, that raises the question of points of entry for cooperative help in early conflict resolution. Since it's not obvious that every group or every country would welcome help of this kind, we need a few examples of points of entry. Now, by countries in trouble, we refer to such attributes as intergroup hostility, governmental repression of vulnerable groups subject to prejudicial stereotypes, rising hate speech, systematic violation of human rights, and inclination to deal with problems by violence. However, there are many countries and sizable groups within almost every country who find tendencies toward hatred and violence dangerous and unwelcome. That is, they do not want hatred and violence if they can find other ways. What are some examples of points of entry for proactive help? One is real offers of tangible economic development linked with internal conflict resolution mechanisms throughout the development process, helping to build national capacity for early ongoing conflict resolution, with international help as may be necessary and acceptable. 2 is cultivate relations with moderate, pragmatic, emerging leaders, democratically inclined to the extent possible. 3, mediation, preferably at an early stage, before revenge motives become severe. 4, problem solving. Organizations such as UNICEF exist in many countries with valuable activities for healthy child and adolescent development as well as education. The offer of extra support for such constructive units can be very attractive, especially in light of the almost universal human attraction to the well-being of their own children. And 5th, there are health units in each region, especially the World Health Organization, that can offer immediate help along with a vision of long-term health improvements. Given the virtually universal yearning for good health, and especially the health of children, there is an opportunity here for health diplomacy, health as a bridge to peace, crossing adversarial boundaries. Another consideration that is novel is the education of political leaders for prevention. We emphasize an unusual example of what can be done through the Carnegie Congressional Program of the Aspen Institute. This is a non-governmental, non-partisan educational program for members of the United States Congress and later for other parliamentarians. It provides strong, factual basis for understanding public policy issues by convening high-level conferences in which legislators from both the United States parties and both houses of Congress have been brought together for many years with internationally recognized independent experts and other highly respected leaders from other countries, as well as the U.S. Overall, the financial costs of early preventive action are likely to be much less than putting Humpty Dumpty together again after he's been smashed. The Carnegie-based studies converge on key points of success in preventive diplomacy. And here I should emphasize the formulation of superordinate goals, a recurrent theme throughout this book. That is, goals that are highly desirable to 2 adversarial groups that they can only obtain by cooperation. And that has a bearing all the way from childhood through the highest level interactions between hostile states. Superordinate goals. Now, that brings us to education for peace, overcoming complacency, prejudice, ignorance. Fundamental in the long run is work with children and youth to build a solid foundation through education so they can shape a peaceful life that embodies mutual understanding and cooperation among human groups throughout the world. They can grow up to develop a strong constituency for prevention of mass violence, supporting leaders who are peacefully inclined, and generating leaders in various sectors who are informed and skillful in minimizing disputes. This sort of approach should be crucial in modern education, yet it is largely lacking so far. Research from several disciplines in field and laboratory in many countries shows that human beings are readily able to form in-group favoritism or in-group bias. It is vital that schools and other child-rearing institutions, for example religious schools, provide a setting in which young people from different backgrounds can overcome the in-group bias and then reach valued common goals in an atmosphere of collaboration. The same principle applies in the formation of governments and international organizations. In short, mutual aid for mutual benefit. That is a recurrent theme of this book, mutual aid for mutual benefit. One crucial set of changes in the strengthening of education is understanding how democracy actually works in various ways. Another is educating girls and women. Another is teaching science and technology for shared prosperity. And another, basic to this book, is practical understanding of nonviolent conflict resolution. The research literature clearly reflects favorable impact of cooperative learning techniques on achievement in secondary schools as well as elementary schools. Such cooperative techniques are applicable also to military and political training institutions. There are several aspects of cooperative learning that have practical importance. Learning to work together to get something done that's important to do. Learning that everyone can be good at something, that everyone can contribute in some way. Appreciating diversity, complementing skills, and dividing labor. Acquiring a mutual aid ethic. Students need a serious curriculum with repeated opportunities to learn and practice cooperative conflict resolution skills. Joint problem solving is a basic element of lifelong learning that has useful applications in economic as well as social contexts. Now a word about democracy and peace, basic practices in preventing mass violence. The very special attribute is democracy, that it can deal with ubiquitous human conflicts below the level of mass violence. The attitudes, beliefs, and procedures typical of democracies, at least at their best, are valuable in dealing with intergroup conflict at all levels, within and beyond state borders. These include informal dialogues, third-party mediation, and organized negotiation between hostile groups. At least moderate tolerance and respect for the viewpoints of other people, and agreement on the practical value of mutual accommodation. Democratic variations share the common themes of seeking fairness, widespread participation, and broad involvement in decisions important to the lives of the population, and cooperation with people from different groups. Even with the fundamental advantages they possess, democracies remain imperfect and require constant vigilance and ongoing adjustments to avoid erosion of democratic values and practices. Freedom of speech, crucial as it is, can tragically be converted to hate speech or ruthless, unscrupulous election tactics. Powerful special interest groups can damage the democratic process. But there is much that can be done to see to it that democratic processes are sustained even in the face of tension between groups. A remarkable step that is largely a product of the 1990s is the international monitoring of election campaigns, their preparation, their conduct, and their aftermath, to guarantee that they are not an empty show. Democratic governments, the UN, regional organizations, and NGOs, especially the Carter Center, contributed here and are now strengthening their capacities to help. Now we have to think a little more about the ups and downs of democracies, overcoming slippage. For example, in Russia, where there's been considerable slippage backward from democracy since Gorbachev was pushed out of office. Similarly, a variety of African nations moved democratically and then have slipped backwards. The prospect for resurgence of democracy depends primarily on three factors. First is gradual socioeconomic development that lifts levels of education, offers real autonomy to citizens, promotes civic organization, and provides an authentic basis for hope of shared prosperity for the next generation. The second matter that's important in overcoming slippage is the gradual integration of countries into a global economy, society, and political order in which democracy is a highly valued norm and the most attractive political system for general populations, one that delivers tangibly an improving quality of life. The third factor in which democracy can prevent slippage is by taking deeper root where it is already sprouted. This has intrinsic value. It encourages neighbors and peer learning. The new democracies must be able to see a horizon attainable through cooperation, internally and externally, and this includes learning from each other from countries in similar situations. Democracy in various forms has the knowledge and skill to keep the ubiquitous human conflict below the threshold of mass violence and to link peace with justice. Now this in turn brings us to economic growth. But nowadays we need to go beyond economic growth in the narrow sense. Equitable socioeconomic development on a worldwide basis offers humanity the best hope for producing conditions favorable to peaceful living, truly civilized relations, and mutual accommodation among rival groups. In short, for preventing war and mass atrocities. This is a much more equitable goal, much more practical goal today to achieve equitable socioeconomic development than it was a few decades ago, even in the face of serious obstacles. Investment in human and social capital is now generally accepted as a central part of development, especially in promoting the health and education of girls and boys and women and men alike, thus making constructive use of the whole population for economic development. The essential features of development, in my view, are knowledge, skills, freedom, and health. They can be achieved by sustained international cooperation, regional and global cooperation, that draws upon the unprecedented advances of modern science and technology in a humanitarian framework. There are several fundamental aims for economic development that are really straightforward. One is widely shared prosperity. The second is empathy and fairness in human relations. The third is multilateral cooperation for an effective trading system. And the fourth is moral commitment to decent human and environmental relations. A word about health and development. Health has been curiously neglected until recently in economic development efforts, as if it were a benefit to be achieved only in the later stage of developments. But AIDS has taught us otherwise. A healthy, vigorous population is essential in building a dynamic, equitable, growing economy. The benefits of globalization are potentially great, though increased exposure to new ideas, practical innovation, life-saving technologies, and efficient production processes, for example, access to effective medications and safer food. Improving the health and longevity of the poor is a valuable end in itself, but it is also a means to achieving other development goals. The links of health to poverty reduction and to long-term economic growth are powerful. International scientific cooperation facilitates biomedical and public health research in low-income countries. Improved surveillance and reporting systems are essential to enhance knowledge of who suffers and dies of which diseases under what conditions. Such knowledge is essential for disease prevention. One practical program, as an example, is training of community health workers throughout the low-income countries in such a way that useful lessons from one country can be utilized in others and new skills can be quickly assimilated into practice. In an emerging conflict, as in public health, the first rule of success is prevention is better than cure. The earlier the better, the more durable the better, and the most effective strategy for prevention of bad outcomes is equitable, socioeconomic, democratic development. So democracy and development are intimately linked together. When Kofi Annan was Secretary General of the UN, he approached me about the possibility of addressing this critical problem. We joined with Bruce Alperts, then President of the U.S. National Academies of Science, who brilliantly led a movement in the global scientific community to focus much more intellectual and technical strength on the problems of developing countries. One of the most encouraging enterprises is the Inter-Academy Council, a cooperative effort of 18 major scientific academies, north and south, intended to provide the most penetrating, objective analysis of developing country problems, and for that matter, global problems as well. The growing commitment to including conflict resolution mechanisms in development initiatives has stimulated recruitment and training of specialists in planning effective conflict prevention initiatives, assisting aspiring democracies in building internal mediation capacities, and disseminating specific practical strategies for engaging reluctant national actors and dealing with the complex historical, economic, ethnic, and cultural issues involved in emerging conflict. The 2011 World Development Report, under the guidance of the bank's most recent president, Robert Zoellick, is a powerful statement that looks across disciplines and experiences drawn from around the world to offer practical recommendations on how to move beyond conflict and fragility toward secure development. The key messages are important for all countries, low, middle, and high income, as well as for regional and global institutions. One is institutional legitimacy is the key to stability. Two is investing in citizen security, justice, and jobs is essential to reducing violence. And three, confronting this challenge effectively means that institutions need to change. Not an easy process, especially in coordination of international efforts. This is a drastic departure from the history of the World Bank. The bank has been, in some respects, the major source of development help, and yet it interpreted its mission so narrowly that any kind of economic growth was sufficient. But now human development is at the center, not building monuments. The central message of the bank now is that strengthening legitimate institutions and governance to provide citizen security, justice, and jobs is crucial to break cycles of violence. Another recent development is the mobilization of the scientific community for development and democracy. The scientific community is the closest approximation we have to a truly international community, sharing certain fundamental interests, values, standards, and curiosity about the nature of matter, life, behavior, and the universe. Its shared quest for understanding has no national boundaries, has no inherent prejudices, no necessary ethnocentrism, and no requisite barriers to the free play of information and ideas. Furthermore, recent advances in telecommunications draw the quest for global understanding closer than ever before. The past decade has seen a remarkable expansion of scientific interest and organization to help in equitable socioeconomic development, and the strength of these efforts to diminish the risk of mass violence. Now, following on democracy and development, let's consider for a moment the closely related issue of human rights. The founders of the United Nations were interested primarily in preventing another world war or another Holocaust. And they perceived the Nazis' terrible human rights abuses, almost beyond human comprehension, that were the early warning signs of aggression and never ceased. The UN founders believed that if the international community had acted early and firmly to stop Hitler and his followers from committing severe internal human rights abuses, it might well have been possible to prevent World War II. There is a strong linkage between human rights abuses and the path to war, mass atrocities, and even genocide. That is why the proposals of the Carnegie Commission on Preventing Deadly Conflict in 1997 that I co-chaired with Cyrus Vance suggest how the international community might take further steps to protect human rights worldwide in the interest of blocking mass violence. It can do so by strengthening existing international law to set standards aimed at deterring human rights abuses, by stimulating and integrating international efforts to develop an early warning system of human rights violations, and by funding efforts to advance the rule of law, democratization, and national human rights institutions, collaborating to strengthen these institutions as best we can. Now, a word about moving toward elimination of nuclear weapons. It's the most vivid example of the more general problem of constraints on highly lethal weapons. That's not limited to nuclear weapons, but the nuclear, of course, are the most dangerous of all, and there is a dramatic story to tell that should teach us a valuable lesson for the future. A remarkable meeting between American President Ronald Reagan and the Soviet leader, Secretary General Mikhail Gorbachev, occurred at Reykjavik, Iceland, in 1986. At that summit, still in the midst of the Cold War, Gorbachev and Reagan faced the danger of a nuclear conflict directly. They agreed on the revolutionary goal of eliminating all nuclear weapons. Their effort was profoundly significant and serious, but they were unable to complete the deal. The seriousness in the discussions between Reagan and Gorbachev is evident in the official transcript of their anguished final negotiating session, an extra one not originally scheduled for their meeting. Both leaders had become nuclear abolitionists, a position for which the world was not yet ready. Problems of domestic politics interfered in both countries. A global consensus and commitment will have to be established to further drastically reduce the nuclear danger. Recent expressions of support from international leaders, both scientific and political, have been of growing importance, but a much broader and more intense engagement of the public at large is needed, and this will depend on a strong, well-known, highly respected international commitment of experts who have examined the end-state options in moving toward a nuclear-free world sooner or later, and who explain broadly and clearly to a worldwide, thoughtful audience the immense nuclear danger, past, present, and future, as well as the options for diminishing that danger. The expert analysis is now including both physical and technical obstacles and political, psychological obstacles and options for overcoming them. Whatever one's view of the feasibility of eliminating nuclear weapons, the world needs unparalleled cooperation in moving toward effective verification and keeping the deadliest weapons of all time out of dangerous hands. All of this involves far greater public understanding than we have been able to achieve so far. The worldwide danger includes the possibility of mass atrocities motivated by religious and our political and our ethnic hatreds. It is difficult to contemplate any stronger stimulus for the international community to come together in common cause and urgent cooperation for survival. Humanity must come to realize that nuclear weapons are not useful weapons of war, but rather instruments of mass suicide. Instruments of mass suicide. In our contacts with Mikhail Gorbachev, he said something that is unforgettable. In 1994, when we were discussing with him these problems, he reflected on a decade of intensive involvement with political leaders all over the world. One of his outstanding conclusions was the large extent to which such leaders see brute force was his term, as their ultimate validation. His observation, based on abundant experience, highlights a long-standing, historically deadly inclination of leaders of many kinds from many places to interpret their mandate as being strong, tough, aggressive, even violent. For all too many, this indeed is the essence of leadership. Gorbachev, in control of a vast nuclear arsenal, not to speak of immense power in conventional chemical and biological weapons, was wise enough not to interpret his own leadership in terms of brute force. Yet there is no shortage of leaders who do. This observation highlights the critical importance of international leadership for effective prevention of deadly conflict. A practical mechanism for dealing with these problems, which we have worked on a great deal in the past decade, is the creation of international centers for the prevention of mass atrocities. That is, creating focal points in governments or in international organizations or strong non-governmental organizations, focal points particularly needed in the major democracies that could provide an extremely valuable reservoir of knowledge and skills, as well as a home base for mobilization of many different institutions and organizations that could make good use of this information. What is the use of early warning if you have no idea about what to do with it? Such centers could stimulate worldwide cooperative efforts in the next few decades to greatly reduce the occurrence of mass atrocities. They would stimulate new ideas, new research, new education, and new modes of cooperation among diverse entities that can contribute to prevention. It is encouraging to see that the UN and the EU are making progress in this arena, as well as leaders of some of the major democracies such as Sweden. They can indeed help to build pillars of prevention. The central function now is to assemble a dependable core professional staff with a critical mass of knowledge and skill drawn from scientists, scholars, diplomats, lawyers, political and military leaders, and specialists in the fields of conflict resolution and violence prevention. Now a moment for concluding reflections. There are some promising changes on the time scale of a decade or a generation. This book shows that there has been a burst of activity to prevent mass violence in the early years of the 21st century. It stands in dramatic contrast to the 19th and 20th centuries. So it is highly desirable and increasingly feasible for the international community, especially the established democracies worldwide, to take measures that help to put out fires when they're small, yet the danger of conflagration is visible. The years required to go from visible jeopardy to full war or genocide offer an interval for the international community, but only if it is alert, well-organized, morally committed, and organizationally prepared to take preventive actions. The earlier and more cooperative, the better. As we have seen, a useful model is provided by the experience in public health over several decades. A strong constituency for preventing deadly diseases has emerged. This has led to improved rates of immunization, better diet and exercise practices, reduced cigarette smoking, and in turn to diminishing the casualties of a variety of diseases. This approach to leadership and public education can be usefully applied to the worldwide problems of conflict. From our own experience over several decades, we see that the scientific community provides understanding, insight, and novel ways of viewing important problems, not least deadly conflict. Through their institutions and organizations, scientists and educators can strengthen research and education in areas pertinent to violence, in the biology and psychology of aggressive behavior, in the understanding of prosocial child development, in the understanding of peaceful intergroup relations, in diminishing prejudice and ethnocentrism, in dealing with the origins of war, genocide, and mass atrocities, in fostering mutual accommodation and early conflict resolution. So, there are perspectives for the future that offer considerable hope in spite of all the difficulties and dangers that exist in the world around us. The remarkable improvements in the human condition that have occurred during our lifetimes suggest that prevention of mass violence is also within reach in this century. Not easily, but possible. We have recognized in this book that our species is a dangerous one, very dangerous, and yet susceptible to conflict resolution. We have seen the evolution of capacities for conflict resolution, for mutual accommodation, and for cooperation beyond prior experience in seeking peace, shared prosperity, and the recognition of our common humanity. We have seen the end of colonialism and imperialism, unprecedented advances in health and reduction of poverty, the worldwide spread of human rights, including the success of the U.S. civil rights movement, the end of fascist and communist totalitarianism, the end of the immensely dangerous Cold War, the end of apartheid and the emergence of democracy in South Africa, indeed, the spread of democracy through much of the world, and the end of legal slavery. All of these advances have limits and periodic setbacks, but overall they represent great changes for the better. The approach of the present book, drawing on human intellect, problem-solving ability, fundamental decency, shared aspiration, and common humanity, may yet greatly diminish the risks of mass violence. But the tasks are exceedingly difficult, and there is no basis here for utopia. Rather, it is a long, hard road to better conditions of life and better human relations. Every chapter in this book strives to clarify the dangers, and above all to suggest from research and personal experience how we can at last learn to live together amicably and fruitfully. As John Lennon put it, all we are saying is, give peace a chance. Thank you.